Hey everybody, welcome to Office Hours with Dylan Hutchison, where we highlight the great people of the channel. I'm joined by Bob Miller. Bob, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Dylan.
Good, good. Thank you for jumping on here. It's been a pleasure to know you and learn from you. And I'm very excited to hear a little of the interesting things that you do that people don't always know about. Some of the entrepreneurship and stuff like that, and the mentorship that we'll dive into here soon.
Yeah, okay, great.
But before we start, just want to get a introduction of you, really the origin story, if you will. Maybe even some information about the awesome guitars behind you.
Okay, yeah, no worries. My name is Bob Miller, and I am the Chief Operating Officer of a managed service provider, managed security service provider in Lafayette, Louisiana, known as Global Data Systems. I've been with them about 5.5 years as a COO, and from my history in general is I'm a technology guy, so I've been in technology companies for about 35 years, over 20 years at a C-level. A lot of startups in my history, so that's probably what I would say is the predominant part of my career has been in multiple startups in the technology sector. Going on about 8 now, I think that's the count. So
Yeah.
and they've kind of ranged from everything. Well, starting out in communications, so I was involved in a startup that was an internet service provider back when that was such a thing, where there were companies that did nothing but provide dial-up internet service. That I was there at the very beginning of that, so was involved in standing it up and getting a company going. It was called iAmerica, LDSI America, and we wound up selling that to the Intermedia NCI monster back then for a good return on investment. Then I went on to be the chief technology officer at a competitive local exchange carrier in Louisiana, and we wound up being a regional player that was a CLEC and data provider. So built that company from scratch. That wound up getting sold to Time Warner Telecom, and then got involved in satellites. Again, one of those weird left turns from a dude from Louisiana. But the investors that were involved in the CLEC purchased Global Star, which was an aerospace company, but they were basically a phone company with satellites, which now everybody sort of has a lot more information on and knows a lot more about, thanks to Elon, right, and what he's doing.
Oh yeah.
But back in the day, back when we were doing this in 2010 time range, it wasn't really that common for people to be using satellite communications. That was still pretty cutting edge. So I got involved with them in buying that company and turning it around and then taking it public again. So I got to do everything from work on product development from a handset standpoint to having some patents. I got a couple of patents while I was there on a product called Spot, which was a personal assistant for tracking and emergency response for individuals. That was a pretty cool project to do. So got to do some patent work there, and then came back to Louisiana and got involved in a startup program here that was turned out to be a technology accelerator. Kind of helped. I was the founding director for that Opportunity Machine. So I helped. We built an organization through the local economic development authority that allowed us to help startups. Mentor them, give them office space, get them up and running. That sort of shared desk. I mean, everybody talks about shared desk,
Yep.
shared workspaces now. It's pretty common. Back then, that was pretty unusual. We had a very early precursor to that, but I got to work with a bunch of technology startups at the time. And even 13 years later, I'm still on the board of the Opportunity Machine. We have about 150 tech companies that are a part of our little local Lafayette, Louisiana ecosystem.
That's
and
awesome.
I get a chance to mentor them and coach them on a whole bunch of different aspects of getting companies up and running. I've been involved with personally owning a couple of startups and helping manage them throughout my career. So that's probably the biggest, I would say that's probably the biggest swath of work that I've done is related to that, because I've learned over time how to get small companies and scale them up when they need to, because they always get to a point where at some point the founder needs some help trying to scale these things up. And so I'm always involved in the ones that I get called into. That's what I typically do. So, and right now I'm working with Global Data Systems, and it was a family-owned company. It's 30 years old, but made the transition from VAR to monthly recurring managed service provider back in 2015 or so, and have been helping them grow. And I helped build the security practice for the MSSP. So got a really great SOC team, and we're really able to do a lot of things that much bigger SOCs do on a normal basis, we're able to do it on a much smaller basis. Mostly my background is computer science and math, so I'm still a software developer. So we lean heavily on automation to not only for our MSP, but also for our MSSP. So that's a big part of what I do is automation systems and help architect those things and have really great teams that can build our software. So it covers a lot of ground. When you're in startups, you wind up being responsible for all kinds of things. So you wind up having a pretty broad knowledge base, right? Everything from HR, the technology stuff's been the easiest part. I tell people all the time, if I could just do the technology part, I'd be always happy. But people engineering is another trait you have to have, and I've had to develop that in parallel. In order to be a COO, you got to learn to be a good people engineer as well. So I've got a lot of experience in product development and innovation engineering. So, always involved in those processes or help getting those processes in place wherever I go. So I guess that, that's the high level.
Yeah.
For you.
No, I like the background, and it's important for people because a lot of folks that might know you, know the great work you do as the COO of a mature managed security service provider, but don't necessarily know all of the experience or mentorship that you do in the startup world. Can you talk about how some of those skills translate from not only owning startups, but then continuing to work and advise startups, how that translates to not only working in your MSP, but maybe how it works with your end customers as well?
There's a lot of the experience and what you've learned and how you've learned to do it and processes and procedures that translate directly. You know what I mean? Because it's interesting because startups are they're really kind of the fun part of the spectrum, because at that point, everybody's doing 10 jobs, everybody stays up all day, all night because they just love what they're doing. And that part is always a really exciting part, the early stages of a development, always tremendously exciting to be involved in because there's innovations every minute. You're always trying to find ways to work around, common problems and kind of keep moving forward, right, with a much smaller crew. So it's, those are exciting times. They really are. And then you hit this phase where you get into these growth phase of the development. Once you get fundraising done or you start cash flowing, then you really start having to get used to being able to scale the company, right, and manage your expenses, but also scale the company. And there's still technological advances that are going on along with that, right? Because at some point, when you go from being 10 dudes and a dog in a room to 30, 40, 50 people, the architecture of the organization has to change along with the culture of the organization, right? Because you can't come in your bunny slippers and pajamas anymore. You're gonna have, you're gonna have HR issues. So there's a bit of a buzzkill involved in moving to that next phase, honestly. But it has its own rewards and values, right? Because people's personal wealth and their careers are moving forward, and so there's a lot. Every stage, it's like having a child. Every stage that your child gets into, is there something new to really enjoy about it and something that you miss, from the previous stages. But you just keep moving forward, and companies are just like that. And that translates for startups, but it also translates for existing companies. I think the benefit of having been involved in all those startups in all those years is I work really hard to keep the culture and environment of our 30-year-old organization. I kind of rebooted it and got it into the mode of thinking more entrepreneurially, right?
Yeah.
And letting to the level that you can do, with a company that's got 130 employees. There's a limit to how creative you can get, because you can't, you only have so many bullets in the gun, and it's a production line and people are working the production line. But there are ways to do it. There are ways to I've introduced the entire organization to the innovation engineering process, which, I've taught them. I actually I'm teaching a class at the university, at our local university, University of Louisiana in Lafayette. I teach a class on innovation engineering to the engineering school. And what it is how to think from an innovation standpoint, how to actually use a process to kind of move that forward. And it's very different from any traditional teaching that they've ever had related to this, right? It's much more of a system approach, but it's got a lot of options and flexibility. Mostly it's about knocking the weird off the process. You know what I mean? About having people interact, and getting used to sharing your ideas with other people, and some of those ideas being terrible, but not getting your feelings hurt about it. So there's a bunch of that sort of dynamic that goes on, but that certainly applies, when you're working with your own organization. to kind of build that same sort of culture of, hey, you know what? Every idea is an okay idea. What we do is we either prove them to be the wrong thing for right now, and we put them on the side, or we advance them, right? And so all of those things work very well between startups and how they operate in an established company. Both of those require some idea of how to have an innovation system and how to prosecute it. And it's amazing what it will do to a culture when you actually get that installed, and honor the fact that, hey, you know what, when we're all in the room together, there are no titles. We're just trying to solve the basic problem, whoever it is. So when I'm in the room, I'm no different than one of our knock engineers or one of our service desk people. I don't assert anything more than being a human in the room trying to help solve the problem, other than facilitating the meeting so it doesn't get out of hand, which, you got to have a little bit of, I am the old dude, so I do get to do a little bit of the throttling when it tries to get out of hand. But in general, it's very, it's kind of a wide open part of the process. And I think people resonate with that because they get heard. And then if we don't do one of their ideas, they know why, because we've worked on it together. And if we do get to work on one of their ideas, they get to say that, hey, that was my idea. And,
right.
That just helps breed a good culture inside of an organization. And I think that's what we've done at Global Data Systems. We built a culture of, hey, nothing's sacred. There are no sacred cows. So I don't care how long we've been doing something. If it looks like it's not working anymore, that we got to get ahead and market some way. We got to take a leap of faith and raise your hand. And there's nothing wrong with raising your hand, right? So I would say that translates almost one-to-one between startups and established companies. And I think it does a hell of a big kick to the culture of the organization to take it from you've seen these organizations that are kind of cover your ass and, nobody wants to do anything and nobody wants to take responsibility because they feel like something bad's going to happen. Well, when you can remove all of that by empowering them to solve their own problems and letting them know it's okay to be wrong. I think when you do that, you really actually get way more than your money's worth, when you do that sort of thing. And so I would say that is a big plus between that an established organization can get out of that. Now, it brings in some discipline. Now, this is another thing. I mean, startups, you got to have to be careful about what you do and when you spend your money. You don't have infinite amount of money, so you have to prioritize. You got to be ruthlessly willing to prioritize things. And it's interesting, but established organizations almost in some cases have a harder time with that, especially if they haven't had their lives kind of prioritized so everybody knows what they should be working on. Then it is. It's a little bit like socks, salt in your socks, right? It just doesn't feel great. But once they kind of understand the why, then it all kind of moves forward. So that's another startup discipline that you really need to have to be successful in that world that translates one-to-one, in an existing organization. So, and those are all really great attributes to be able to help coach and teach. So not only at a university to engineering students, but also to your own personnel, right? And I don't see any difference between those folks. If I know something and you don't, and I can show it to you, then I'm going to show it to you. I'm not going to try and. It's more empowering for an organization to spread that knowledge.
Right.
And so yeah, we really do we do embrace that whole focus on bringing people forward. You know what I mean? Creating, giving them more tools to work with in their career, whether it's with us or if they go somewhere or whatever.
Yeah.
We don't differentiate.
I like going back to one of your earlier points of everybody has good ideas. It's just a matter of how we execute them. Yeah. And you really enable your team to bring those ideas to the table. I like that because everybody has buy-in at that point. Yeah. Nobody's just going through the motions, working their 9 to 5 or their overnight shift in the SOC, just going through the motions. They're always looking for ways to improve or bring new efficiencies to the table. That really goes to show how you can bring just a really great culture, whether you're coming from a startup or a very, very mature organization alike. I do want to focus in on you being an educator. So, and not just being a professor at the local college, but also being a mentor and guide for those in the community. So you once told me it's not about the recipe, it's about the cook. Talking about your mom's cake recipe. So let's talk about, sharing some secrets or guides to help MSPs or others in the space mature their operations.
Yeah, there's so with that analogy you're referring to is I tell people all the time because they worry about whether or not someone's going to figure out something that we're doing and try to duplicate it to compete with us. And I tell them that story. Right? I say, look, my mother's got this chocolate cake recipe. She's had it since my grandmother, and she makes a chocolate cake, and everybody wants a recipe of that damn chocolate cake. Everybody's after it all the time. And my mother freely gives it to them. She'll even stand there and make it right in front of them. She has no reservations whatsoever doing that. And I've never tasted a single one of those duplicate chocolate cakes that came close to my mother's chocolate cake. And I don't know why, right? I mean, I don't have a logical reason why. Yes, I know it's my mother, but I'm talking about just on the surface. I mean, there's some spin of the wrist or turn of the pan that makes a big difference that you just don't get intrinsically from by looking at the instructions. And that's what I tell all our guys all the time. Is don't worry about what other people are trying to do. It really doesn't matter. That's wasted energy. What we need to be looking forward. And we don't want to try and work on something that's just going to get us to be a duplicate of someone else. Mm-hmm. We need to be looking for things that get us out ahead of someone else, right? And that means taking some risks. That means actually taking some shots into some areas that nobody really has telemetry on to tell you if you're on the right track or not. The difference being, again, is that innovation engineering mindset where we do a lot of testing of the idea before we ever spend a nickel on development. And I think that's where a lot of companies fail, is that they spend an inordinate amount of time and effort building something before they actually know if it's the right thing to be building or not. So that allows us to mitigate a lot of risk. And you were talking about the fact that including a lot of people, the equation of a good product, the ideas are cheap, right? I mean, you and I could sit in a room, do some random word generations with ChatGPT. Yeah, we'd have 100 in an hour, right? We'd literally, and out of that 100, maybe 10% we'd go, hey, that kind of looks like really something there. And out of that 10%, there's going to be 3 like, we got to stop what we're doing and go do those, right? I mean, that's where we would be. So generating the ideas is the easy part. It's the execution on getting them to market that really takes all the commitment. And that's where having a system really comes into play, right? I mean, before you spend all that time and effort and energy and disappoint a bunch of people by building something that nobody actually buys. And by the way, there are millions of examples of this every week, right? Of a product that hits the shelves and never gets bought, right? Mm-hmm. You can clearly hasn't followed an innovation engineering mindset about whether or not they were actually doing something that people had value, thought were meaningful enough and unique enough to buy. But that is the secret to it, is staying focused in the process. And all of that is a teaching opportunity inside of your organization. I mean, there are meaningful conversations all along the spectrum of working a problem from concept to commercialization, right? That whole lifespan. And that's where, from a secret standpoint, I would say you need to embrace the idea of an innovation system in your organization, because it's going to save you infinite amounts of time and infinite amount of money trying to build something that in the end may not be what people actually feel like there's a lot of value in. I think that is a big problem that most people have especially if they're in this endless product development kind of mode of operation. The other thing that basic MSPs, MSSPs, the ones that, they don't really have they don't have good policies and procedures in a lot of cases, right? They haven't really spent the time to learn, how that works. A bureaucracy that keeps you from moving forward, right? I think that's a main fear I hear all the time is, but okay, well, yeah, but that's just going to slow us down. Or there's no way you can be creative if you've got policies and procedures in place. That's just going to kill all of the creativity. And I explain to people all the time, and this is going to tie into these guitars behind me in this case. It's like, so music is a set of policies and procedures. There are keys, there are chords, there are notes, there are scales, and every piece of music. So they really have a rigid framework to work with. Mm-hmm. You can't really get outside of that, or it sounds like crap. So you got to stay in those rules, or it's just not going to work, right? But every song you've ever heard in your life was written with those same framework, that same set of chords, scales. So creativity is not a problem inside of a space where there are, guardrails around you as it relates to a framework. Frameworks don't make it more or less creative or innovative in that span. It's how you approach your problem and using those tools to get you where you really want to be. And so that's, that has helped me as someone who plays music and as a musician. That's helped me kind of explain, hey, look, those rules don't mean anything. Those rules are giving you way too much latitude, if anything. Mm-hmm. You can still write a really lousy song, right? And it could sound terrible. you're usually breaking a rule in most cases. But even if you're not, you can still write a crappy song with a really good set of rules. So it doesn't really have any effect on the thing. So the bottom line is having policies and procedures can help eliminate a lot of noise in your organization, which then can allow you to put that energy into things that really can move the needle for your organization. Having really good documentation, really good contracts, having a good document strategy. Those are all things you learn as part of a startup, or especially when you're trying to organize new young organizations. They're really important. Policies, procedures, processes, documenting the ones that matter, don't wasting time on the ones that don't matter. Exactly. Being flexible about that. I think that's another thing. Some people go too far and over document, and that means you got to maintain those things forever, right? And then the first time you start, they start growing old and nobody touches them. Everybody has just learned a lesson. Hey, they don't really matter, and therefore it goes downhill from there. So you got to be knowledgeable about, okay, we need them, but let's not go overboard. Let's just do the ones we absolutely need. And let's leave the rest of them for a situation later that dictates, hey, now we probably need to add a policy on this because this has happened a few times and we want to stop it from happening.
Okay, so that's an important point right there. Hey, this has happened a couple times. Let's write a procedure about that. I was going to ask you, as a young organization, how do you decide which policies and procedures really matter?
Yeah, well, I can tell you, I always call it the smoke test. When there's smoke, you probably need to do something about it. So I don't worry about it until it becomes a problem. That's something I've learned over years, right? So, and that's the fact. So if we can do it by hand and we can do it right, 10 out of 10 times or 100 out of 100 times, probably not the priority in this situation, right? But you're not going to have to worry because 2 degrees to the left, something's going to be dropping and failing all the time, right? I mean, that's just how it works. There are going to be things they get out of hand too frequently, or if they're eating up too much time of individuals. I've never had a problem determining what I needed to do because I just pay attention to what's causing the organization the most pain. Mm-hmm. And I just focus on the things that are the most painful. Now, you don't want to leave that too long because you're going to have customer satisfaction issues, right? So you got to be vigilant, and you can't go to sleep on that. But it's really straightforward to me to figure out, okay, well, now we need a policy. So we had to put one in place recently, right? We put one in place a couple of years ago on how to use social media if you're a company employee, what you can and can't do as an employee. Now, if you have your personal accounts, we can't really dictate anything there. We don't try to. We just say, hey, but we give them guidance on, hey, when you're our employee, they're going to associate whatever you say with the organization. So we give you some guidelines, right? And the policy is you just need to be aware of the guidelines. Well, you didn't need that unless, until such a time when that got to be a problem.
Right.
So that's when you need to layer it on, right? Now, AI, everybody's freaking out about the use of AI here, there, and yonder within, inside of organizations. So, we at least have to put a rule out. We have to put something out and says, okay, we don't want to use any large language models. We don't want any customer data or any data that's private to the organization to be used in any of those tools because of the risk of exposure for these public tools. Mm-hmm. Well, we didn't have to do that until last year, right? But last year, we had to layer something on to give some guidance. So we didn't write that 4 years ago when we didn't need it. We wrote it last year when we could see a train wreck coming. That's the thing. After a while, you can see the problems coming before they get to be like real big problems, right? That's what tends to happen when you do it enough and you're paying attention. So I would say that's an example for when's the right time to do it or the not time.
Yeah.
Now, this is a really Global Data Systems is a 30-year-old organization. And when I got here, they didn't have a whole lot of established workflow or processes. So that was something I spent probably 3 years getting straight at the beginning, was getting all those documented because they were wasting so much time and it was frustrating for the workers. So that was easy too. I just needed to go find the worst pain, knock that one out with whatever I needed, policies, procedures, processes, then go down the list. What's the next thing that we waste the most time on? And believe me, when you ask your employees, hey, what are we wasting our time on? Nobody's shy. They'll all say, well, we spend forever doing this stuff, and we don't really understand why. It gets real simple to pick. It gets real simple.
So one of the processes, or maybe I'll call it a smoke test that you and I have talked about, is the fact that selling cybersecurity is not easy. But you put together a security maturity framework for your sales reps. So at a very high level, or whatever. What is that? And more importantly, why'd you create it?
Well, so that was really the problem was, and I knew this as we were adding the security portfolio to the business. We do infrastructure management as a service. So, I mean, it's not like the organization is not used to some complex stuff, because you can't really build a properly segmented network with the right routing and appropriate rules on Active Directory and, patching of servers and workstations. I mean, there's a lot of complexity involved in that, right? So the organization was more than capable of being able to do and communicate the benefits of those very technical products and services. They were capable of doing that. But security is a different beast altogether, right? Because what it does, it talks about interactions between all of those systems. And the number of interactions that it can occur are orders of magnitude greater than just the pieces themselves and what happens with them individually, right? Routers and switches and firewalls, they're a universe to themselves, but that universe is relatively confined, and it's something you can get your mind around, whereas security spans all of that stuff. Mm-hmm. So as it is hard to talk about, as it is even hard to describe, like I'm doing right here, it's very hard to talk about. So, and it was very difficult for our salespeople to kind of get the concept in their mind. So I sat and thought about, and there are a lot of great frameworks out there. There are frameworks that talk about cybersecurity like CIS and NIST, but those are technical frameworks about control specifically. And when your sales team doesn't even know what a control is, just flashing those frameworks in front of people doesn't move the needle. So I built, it's sort of, and I'm not lying when I say I took what is the service leadership operational maturity level concept, right? Service leadership that's now part of ConnectWise, I guess. I think they were bought by ConnectWise, but they have an operational maturity level, and there are a lot of aspects of that where you say, okay, do you do this or do you do that, and how well do you do this and how well do you do that, and you come up with a score that kind of gives you an operational maturity level. So like GDS is, I think we're at 4.3, right, and 5 is the most you can get, and best in class is 4 or above. So, but we've worked really hard to do all of those elements, and we know what they are and we understand them. Well, I decided to use the same theory and say, okay, well, security maturity level is how much investment have you made in your organization's cybersecurity strategy, and what are the elements of that, right? So I broke it down without using any technical terms. I broke it down in very simple terms, things like multi-factor authentication. I don't say 2FA or MFA. I say multi-factor authentication, and here's what that is. It's logging into something with more than one method of reassuring yourself that you're the right person. Mm-hmm. So I broke these things down into much more granular levels, and then we talk about them in plain English, and then we group those, the requirements for those, to go from most companies that we deal with are at security maturity level 0, because they don't have a device inventory. So my big 3: device inventory, network map, and change management. If you don't have those 3 in place, you're out of control. Right? I can tell if a company's out of control. 5 minutes. Show me your device inventory. Show me your network maps, which include routing, and tell me that you got a change management process so that if you modify your network in some way, you're keeping track of that. You tell me those 3 things, I'm going to say, good, you got the foundation. Now let's see what's missing upstream in that. And that's how I broke it down. I broke it down into the things you need for level 1 are pretty straightforward. Multi-factor, endpoint detection response, and the things that our cybersecurity insurance providers are going to want you to have to even talk to you. I basically rounded those off and call them security maturity level 1, right? And then there's a lot of other pieces you can have in addition to that help your score, but they don't get you to 2 until you have a certain group of them pulled together, right? And then security maturity level 2 is a more advanced level of those things where it groups a lot of those point products down below into more of a cohesive strategy. Mm-hmm. And that's really what it is. It's in plain English, and it allows you to talk about things like, your backups and recovery. Is your backups immutable? So it just talks about those things. What does immutable mean? It means nobody can change it. Once it's done and in place, nobody can modify your encrypted backup volumes at rest, right? It's really important nowadays to be thinking in terms of that, right? And then simple things like, when's the last time you did an Active Directory audit? You don't have that. Role-based access control. You know, do you have a principle of least privilege, right? So that people are only getting least privilege. And we talk about all of the technologies that fit into this. Zero trust. What does that mean as opposed to multi-factor? It's just spelled out in plain English. And the reason I did it was so that our salespeople could have a strategic conversation with business owners at a level that was that both our account managers and the business owners could talk at that point, right? So it was just trying to simplify it. You know, create another framework. I mean, you know, you tell people, well, I got another framework. It's like, come on, man, we got 9 million frameworks. This was really designed to be a conversational framework to help get to the strategy level as soon as possible, and at least get people to understand as easily as possible that there are a lot of pieces and parts, and they can all affect your security maturity level. But here's what it means in plain English. So that's really what it is.
I like that. And for those that, you know, don't really know where to get started as it relates to, hey, I'm a break fix shop that is just starting to get into MSP work, trying to get my foot into cybersecurity. Is that something that you'd be willing to, you know, strike up a conversation and kind of work with them on?
Well, I mean, I can, you know, there are lots of people, not just me. Like, there's a couple communities they can get into right away that could help them. Not just me that I'm a part of, but you know, Empath Cyber is one of the ones that I am associated with. Wes Spencer and Kyle and Alex Farling, and those guys are all, you know, really great, and they've created a great community where and I'm in that community. So those people are bringing up questions all the time, and we talk amongst ourselves, and if I don't know it, somebody else will know it. But yeah, I'm always willing to talk to people about these, and I do. I try to do as much. I try to do as many sessions as I can from a webinar standpoint. I mean, I have not built the system that you have about getting your content out. But I really do like sharing it. You know what I mean? Because it's taken a lot of years to learn some of this, and there's real reasons, you know, not to go down certain paths because they could be a waste of time and money. You don't really know that until you've smashed your face on the glass and figured it out, and then, you know, got around it and kept moving forward. So
let's focus in on that though. So we've talked about it's okay not to know everything, and being able to lean on your peers to learn those lessons, see what they've gone through. I mean, one thing that you shared with me is that you didn't even know that you were supposed to practice your incident response plan before Matt Lee started crushing it into all of our heads. So,
well, the thing I knew we needed an incident response plan, and we would walk through it, and we did, right? So that's been a recent thing, right? We just did this last November. We had an all-day offsite for the operations team, and also I got finance involved and sales and warehouses and the field techs, and we all got in a room, and Matt Lee with PAX 8 and then Ethan Tancredi from Huntress have developed this torture chamber that they call your worst day, right? The worst day. And it's basically I'm going to say it's a hearts and minds incident response game, because it doesn't necessarily exercise your personal IR plan. But what it does do is wear you out with how bad it could really be. And it has some variables in it about you come into it, and it's got some configurations that say, okay, you're part of a peer group. If you're part of a peer group, one of the injects gives you extra engineers because your peer group comes to help you out. Or if you're not part of a peer group, you don't get those extra hands while you're playing the game. And it's really a hoot to play. So I put all of our people at tables and ran them through that game. It takes about 4 hours to do. Yeah. But I ran our whole organization through that game real time live. I modified what Matt and Ethan had. I put our customer names in the mix, and their revenue levels and how long we've known them. Those were all aspects of the game. And then it was I don't want to really talk. I'm not going to say what that scenario was, but it was a bad one for an MSP. I can promise you that. It was a terrible scenario for an MSP. And so each table was their own, quote, little MSP out of our group, and they were competing against one another. And I was fascinated at how much we learned being a mature MSP who does walk through our IR plan twice a year religiously. We have one, and we walk through it twice a year. I was blown away with how much we learned by playing this game. Just by playing this game. We had to modify at least a dozen things in our several-year-old, reviewed twice a year IR plan. We made a dozen changes to it just from playing this game. And it's kind of shocking to think that we could be as mature as we are and know our operations as well as we do, and feel like we got all of our stuff together, and then play this game and just basically get our ass handed to us. I mean, when I look at it on this, when I look back at what we've had to modify, it was like, wow, why did we not think about it from that angle? But that's the secret. That is the key to why these things are so valuable, why these exercises are so valuable. You get views from different views of the apple, different perspectives, right? Mm-hmm. And when you do that, when you include lots of people, and you go through an exercise like this, you always learn something. You always learn something. You just do, right? And that's why the value of these walkthroughs is so critical, not only for your customers, they're definitely critical for your customers, but as an MSP, you have to do them. And I don't care how big or how little you are, you're going to find something that you're going to walk out of there, because this is it was horrifying and terrifying when I sat through it the first time.
I'm sure.
When Ethan, the torture master, was running this thing, and he was just wearing us out with the injects, and we were all sitting there miserable trying to work through this process. But it was the most enjoyable, miserable thing I've ever done in my life, because I got up going, I have to put my organization through this. I want them all to see, why do we have all these controls? Why do we have a bring your own device network that's a pain in the ass to get on, right? And then we have a production network that you can't get on unless you're one of the devices that we certify. Why is that? People seem to be they were annoyed about it. Tell you what, I don't get complaints anymore.
That showed them why it's important.
Yeah, I mean, they saw what could happen, right?
Yeah.
And that's really what happened. So yeah, that is a great thing to do.
That's why I always tell people. That's why I always tell people, don't be so absorbed in the island that you live on inside of your own MSP or in the vendor world.
That's right.
Take advantage of the great community and all of the resources out there, because you'll learn a hell of a lot more than you could ever read online or anything like that. You'll hear the war stories or go through the torture chamber yourself and figure out, shit, these are the things that I have to put in place to not only protect myself, but protect my customers.
Yeah, well, I mean, everybody, if you go to going to these conferences, especially the ones that are really geared toward MSPs from an educational standpoint, they're worth the investment, because I can't tell you how many things we have hardened in our operations directly because of interactions that I've had at these conferences with people. I met the first one I went to 2 years ago. The first one I went to was MSSP Alert Live in Washington, D.C. And I met Wes Spencer, Reed Wellock, and then Eric Tills. They did a talk, and we wound up going with Fifth Wall, for our, actually they're our insurance agent as well as our partner for, our customers, cyber insurance kind of deal. Eric Tills is our attorney, our contract attorney. So he helped, over the last 2 years, we've rebuilt our managed service agreement, and all of the documentation strategy that we have is built on top of the knowledge that Eric brought to the table as an attorney who used to have an MSP and sold it as a successful MSP owner. And then, Reed with Fifth Wall, again, that relationship. So that first conference netted me 3 really important relationships. I do things with Wes all the time now. He's one of my favorite people on the planet, just because he's he's an entrepreneur and he's a technical guy, so there's a lot we have in common. Mm-hmm. And I just enjoy hanging out with those guys at Empath because they're very smart people. So, but all of that happened because I got out of my office and started kind of getting engaged. And you're right, the amount of knowledge you can get is pretty staggering, even for someone who thinks they've got it all nailed down in their head pretty good. It's you're not wrong. You're exactly right. Get out and mix it up with people. Form some relationships. And by the way, this MSSP group, the cybersecurity group, they're completely open. No one feels competitive on any level at that level, because there's more work than we can all handle, right? So
exactly.
They're all very open book. I mean, 99% of them are going to be wide open books and tell you what they know. Like I said, they'll give you a cake recipe. It'll all come down to whether or not you can make a cake worth a damn, but you'll at least have the information, right? So that's the important.
Right. And hey, maybe you can even take that chocolate cake and take it on a spin and make your own kind of cake. Mix a couple different recipes that you've come across from different people, and
exactly
it might be a terrible cake, but who knows? Maybe it's the next best thing.
I don't know why. Now I want some cake.
Yeah, weirdly, I kind of want the cake too. So, Bob, before we wrap up,
Yeah.
just want to close out with a couple key lessons that you'd like folks in the community to know, whether it's being vulnerable, not being afraid to ask questions, or not being afraid on the other end to be a leader, step out, have those difficult conversations about, hey, here's where I'm uncomfortable and here's the lessons I've learned. Just a couple lessons learned that we can share.
Yeah, sure. I would. So, again, building those relationships in our community, it turns out it's not hard to do if you're willing to put in a little work. So I can tell you a lot of these relationships that I have, I volunteer to help them do something that's important to them that I can also get some value out of. And I always learn a tremendous amount about that and form really good relationships. So I tell people all the time, how can I really get into that? Because it didn't seem to, I've had people say, it didn't seem to take you long to really get to where you were on a first name basis with people. I said, well, it's because I'm an open book and I share what I know, but I also help them. I will help somebody get something done if it's important to them and it's important to me and we're in alignment. I'll spend some of my own time to do that. And I think if you do that, if you go into it at the beginning doing something like that, then you're going to establish some really good relationships, and those are going to pay off. They're going to pay off way more than the amount of money you spend to go to those, meetings and things. And there are going to be times when that might actually save your company, right? I mean, we know a lot of MSPs that have gotten hit, in some ways because of third-party attacks or whatever, and people in the community come to help them without being asked. That doesn't happen unless you're part of the community, right? So you have to be engaged. So I would say that's really how do you be engaged? Get in there and get busy, get your hands dirty, work with people, do something that matters to you, that matters to them too, find that alignment and then offer to help them do something, and get it moving, especially if you're going to get the benefit of the knowledge that's being developed and shared. Matt Lee's got a great project about building the taxonomy for all those CIS controls. And I didn't do anything other than tell Matt he needed somebody to have he needed facilitators because he thought he could do it all. I said, no, you can't, and it'll go a lot better if we get some facilitators that just help you manage the meeting. And it went great, right? And as a facilitator, you get to take part in everything. So I spent my Christmas week holidays with Matt Lee, every other day doing this stuff, and it was awesome. I learned so much, being involved in that process. And the other thing is, like I said, key things, learn those how to deal with our innovation systems. That's a really big deal because building products and new services, it takes a lot of money to even contemplate doing that. And you really need to think hard about it, and you need to focus on whatever your particular mission is. So knowing a lot about yourself and what you're good at is important. And then using a system to push those things down the road and be successful, really critical to do.
I like that. Those are really good messages. I've always told people the reason I love the channel is because it's just a bunch of cool people doing cool things together. It's one of those, I'll call it a safe space where you can be honest, open, transparent, vulnerable. And those people, the true members and friends of the community are going to flock to you and just help you grow and blossom into the person that they know you can be. So I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's rare. So get involved. Absolutely.
So closing out, Bob, if people want to learn more about you, connect with you and learn more, how do they do that best?
You can I'm on LinkedIn. So if you look up Robert Miller on LinkedIn, you should be able to find me really easy. And like I said, Global Data Systems, you can always find us at our website, GetGDS. So there's that's an easy place to do it. And if you're over on Empath Cyber, I'm in that community as well. And so I'm there and available. I'm really pretty easy to find.
Love it. Well, Bob, thank you very much for joining me here.
Yeah. Thanks, Dylan. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed it myself.
I appreciate it.